A forensic investigation into the VBS Mutual Bank has revealed wide-ranging criminality in the conduct of the bank's officials and their associates. The Great Bank Heist report details how almost 2 billion rand was gratuitously received from VBS by some 53 persons of interest, both natural and juristic, over the period of the 1st of March 2015 to the 17th of June 2018. Let's talk to the investigator and author of the report, Advocate Terry Motau. Good to have you, Advocate. Thank you very, very much for coming into studio.
Good morning, Lena, and good morning to the viewers.
When you started working on the investigation into what was going on at VBS, did you have any magnitude whatsoever of the looting that was taking place?
I must say I, at the commencement, did not have an appreciation of the extent and the scheme that was employed to rob this bank and to actually steal this amount. One thought we perhaps looking at figures much, much lower than what we ultimately came out at.
And we're sitting at 2 billion rand.
It's almost 2 billion, yes.
How different, if we can, before we get into the details, when we look at something like this and what happened at VBS,
yes.
I mean, how different is this to, say, the state capture inquiry that's currently underway, or the allegations of massive state capture?
Well, I must perhaps not comment too much about the state capture because I'm going to be an active participant there for one of the entities. But what I can say is the principles that are sought to be established by the State Capture Commission are pretty much not different, because the State Capture Commission is looking into irregularities, whether there were any, and whether there are individuals and entities who benefited unlawfully. Yeah. So you can draw similarities to some extent between what the State Capture Commission is looking into and the exercise that we've just completed.
If we look into VBS as it stands right now and after your investigations, is there any prospect whatsoever of saving VBS? Is there any hope that they can be saved?
In fact, I do deal with this issue in the report, and I express a view that, contrary to what other commentators are saying, I'm of the view that the bank is in a hopeless situation and it cannot be saved. Yeah. One of the things to bear in mind is that this is so much more impactful if one has regard to the banking system in its entirety, because for the system to work, people must have the confidence in the system. And you can imagine the most vulnerable and the elderly who've been saving their monies are the ones that have suffered in this. So, in my view, given the extent of the rot within the bank and given the individuals involved and where they are placed in the bank, I see no prospect. Yeah. And also from a reputational repercussion perspective, I do not think that you can still enjoy investor confidence among others, and your ordinary bankers will...
What about the most vulnerable? I mean, you mentioned them. People have their life savings there. People have invested diligently. This was a kind of bank that was never meant for what's happened to it. I mean, this is it's something where people keep their money and hope one day that, you know, when they want to pull it out and enjoy a retirement, they're able to. At this point, will they ever see that money?
Well, two things. The one is I'm happy that you're asking that question, because I think the correct narrative should be to look at this from the victim's perspective. It's no answer to try and label this bank as a black bank that's under siege and not want to deal with issues of accountability, because accountability has no color. That's the first aspect. And the second aspect is, if you have a look at the question of the victims in the form of the investors, one has to ask themselves the question, did the bank officials do right? And the answer is a clear no. And if you're talking about prospects of recovery, one of the issues that is central is a recommendation that we've made to be considered by the prosecutorial authorities, who need to act with speed.
Yeah.
Because this is so dependent on the NPA acting without delay. And I mean, that's something that's out of our hands, and I assume it's also out of the Reserve Bank's control, because if the Reserve Bank accepts our recommendation and findings, what they will then do is provide the report to the NPA, and we hope that the NPA will effect arrests and do what it needs to do.
Let's talk about the Reserve Bank. When did they become aware of all of this? How could they have allowed this to happen?
One needs to bear in mind that the Reserve Bank has entities such as external auditors or companies such as external auditors to perform an independent function.
I.e. KPMG?
To be specific in this case.
Okay.
And the reason why you seek an external auditor is that the Reserve Bank, as the regulator, should enjoy the confidence that the representations that are made to it by external auditors are correct. And one can understand the predicament in which the Reserve Bank found itself in, because you have a situation that one could never have anticipated, where you have external auditors being complicit and actively having participated or having allowed this and or enabled it through signing the various monthly reporting procedures through what is termed DI reports, and signing off on the financials.
Yeah. So obviously your recommendations in this are basically pointing towards criminality, and
yes.
Those that have been found guilty is to get the Prudential Authority to take steps to lay criminal complaints against those that have been identified. We're talking in excess of 50 people that have been a part of the scheme of stealing funds out of VBS. I mean, the names in this and the amounts of money, as we were talking about it earlier, 325 million has become like 325 rand, the way things have been operating. I mean, do you think, are you confident that this will go through? I mean, with all the evidence that's there, do you think these criminal charges have got weight and they will be held accountable?
Firstly, I have confidence in the integrity of the evidence and what was established. But the most central part is that those that have been identified should also have an opportunity to have their day in court and give an explanation if they wish to provide an explanation different from what the narrative provided. So that is the fairness of a constitutional state. What we have indicated is we're seeing wrongdoing, and this wrongdoing we've detailed in the report, and that will enable those that are involved and or implicated to have a further opportunity to have their say and protest their innocence and justify the basis thereof.
Yeah.
But on what we found, I have no doubt on the credibility of the evidence, and provided the prosecutors prosecute this case carefully. And it obviously follows that people who are involved in this investigation will have to work hand in hand with the prosecutors through some cooperative agreement or working relationship to enable that. Because to have people who have no idea how the evidence was uncovered, interpreting this and trying to present it to court without the assistance of the people who've spent months looking into this may compromise how the case is presented.
The individuals implicated in all of this, I mean, you obviously have had a big look into them. Chifiwe Matodzi, he is the man with, I suppose, the biggest price tag hanging over her head. I mean, 325 million rand. We've got Andile Ramabunga, 28 million rand. And then, of course, there are a lot of other people that have been implicated as well. Chances of recovering the money from them? I mean, we were chatting a bit earlier. You're talking fancy cars, helicopters, Lamborghinis, things like that. I mean, what are we looking at here?
What is essential to the prospects of recovery is speedy action on the part of the NPA, because you will see part of what the report deals with. It covers an active and a concerted effort to dissipate assets, which we have discovered that has been underway, and I have no doubt that it is underway. So an urgent intervention increases and or maximizes the prospects of recovery.
Yeah.
So this is, the immediate intervention by the NPA is key and central to all of this.
Yeah.
Because if they're going to delay, you'll find that prospects of recovery become less and less.
Now, this looting is basically VBS going on a concerted and deliberate campaign at the end of the day. They were trying to get very substantial deposits from the municipalities, such as Vembe municipality, and this is the same municipality that we saw basic services being interrupted. We saw schools being burnt. People were not getting any services there. Let's talk about the mayor's role in all of this and the mayors of the municipalities. Are they held accountable as well? Have they been found to have also had a role to play here?
The report lists how the scheme operated, which is duping municipalities into making deposits in return for an incentive in the form of bribes. So there are various municipal officials, some of whom have been named in the report, who are beneficiaries in the scheme. So in other words, when there is clear legislation against municipalities investing in a mutual bank, people disregarded the National Treasury's directive because they had a self-interest, because since they stood to benefit through the illicit bribes that were given. Yeah. And that's the only reason why municipalities disregarded a clear directive. I mean, the legislation is quite clear on this issue. And one understands the incentive that justifies or explains the total disregard of what National Treasury had clearly articulated, which it didn't need to, because in any event, the legislation is very clear.
I mean, as we began this interview, we were talking about the depositors, and this has all been to the detriment and the expense of the depositors. So I suppose the question is, have the accounts and the estates of the VBS captors and their associates actually been seized at this time?
You'll have noticed that what transpired during the course of the investigation is that we were giving interim reports to the Prudential Authority with certain recommendations. Yeah. And part of those which were implemented includes sequestration and liquidation, which has happened. So at this stage, there is a process underway which has prospects of a recovery. And one needs a holistic effort through all of those that are concerned to play their part in order to maximize the benefits, so the prospects of recovery, so that the most vulnerable have a chance of recovering some, if not all of it.
Not all of it. Yes. Now, Andile Ramabunga, the chief executive of VB, denied that he was involved in any way. I mean, he's been, as you say, everybody's got to have their turn to bring their case forward. But he has said that he's not involved in any unlawful conduct whatsoever. He said he received, contends that the payments that were made were for consultancy purposes only, and that he had no role in any of the looting whatsoever. So he's pleading his innocence. I can imagine others will as well. The price tag on him is 28 million rand.
Fortunately, one of the things that happened is that Mr. Ramavunga is one of those people who was afforded an opportunity to come before the investigation and to give his version on the evidence that we had. There are a number of difficulties with the explanation that he has given. Those have been dealt with in the report. But what happened, which is something very disturbing, is that during the course of the investigation, he waived his right to further participate because he put up demands after demands which were unreasonable and purely not in accordance with the principles of fairness. So the report details what he said, he gave it as an explanation, and the number of difficulties. Let me give you the one example. As a CEO of the bank, he was precluded from doing other business without the consent of his employer, for obvious reasons. He was asked about whether did he declare these other additional activities and did he obtain the consent?
Yeah.
And none of that occurred. For example, one of the things that we deal with in the report is that he used information that he acquired on account of being the CEO of the bank by saying he put a deal together between two of the bank's clients, which in law, that ought to be a corporate opportunity for the benefit of the bank.
Absolutely.
And he took it for his own benefit.
Yeah.
So what I would suggest is people should, before commenting and taking sides, they should give themselves the time to read the report, study
take the
it,
facts into account.
Yes.
I mean, we're running up to news, but there's just two very quick issues I need to talk about, and this is really at the heart of all of this, is the Municipal Finance Management Act. It's there. It stipulates that no municipality should be investing in a mutual bank. They need to go into a bank, and yet, do you find that these deposits into these mutual banks, there were bribes paid over to the municipal officials to do this? But the question should be, the Act stipulates they shouldn't have done that. It was done. Why was it done? Where did the pressure come from?
If one looks at the modus operandi, I did touch on this earlier. The benefit that people stood to derive from disregarding the law is a clear incentive, which was the bribes. And earlier on I said it's self-interest at the expense of the depositors.
Yeah.
One, and secondly, you touched on a point earlier that some of the municipalities, if not most, are faced with service delivery issues. And this in part explains why it is that the money was not used for the purpose for which it was intended. Because you would have seen that municipalities would deposit money, but there would be a difficulty when they're supposed to get it out, because more and more bribes had to be paid to, in inverted commas, keep the deposit and roll it over, when in truth and in fact, the money had long left the bank and there was no money to repay.
Finally, PRASA. You also found that there were attempts to actually obtain a deposit from PRASA back in 2017. It's amazing what a short period of time this all happened. I mean, we're talking between 2015 or 2016 up until the beginning of this year, where all of this money was taken and all this wrongdoing happened. I mean, I can imagine it would have even further crippled PRASA. It's already in a really critical state right now, but that would have just brought it to its knees even further.
It would have created difficulties. And it should be noted that PRASA is not the only one that was targeted. There were more. But what is troubling with this is that certain bribes had already been paid through commissions in anticipation of a deposit by PRASA, which never even happened.
Let's leave it there for this morning. I know there's so much more to talk about, but we've hit 7 o'clock here on the news, but just giving you a much more detailed look into what's happened at VBS Mutual Bank. We've got the investigator and author of the VBS Mutual Bank Great Bank Heist here in studio with us, talking to us. Just as a final, and I know I said my final question to you already, what happens now? If we can take this story forward, the report is out, what happens now?
What I'm hoping for is what I start with in the report, that contrary to one of the heists that happened back in the days where no arrests happened, one hopes that in this instance we should demonstrate that this is a constitutional state, there's no lawlessness in this country, and I hope that arrests will be effected and that people will be brought to book and to account.
Advocate, thank you very much for your time. All right, I'm going to hand you back now to Sakina, who